Welcome back to the Conscious Entrepreneur Podcast, where we explore the journeys, insights, and experiences of some of today's most inspiring and innovative leaders in the world of entrepreneurship. Today, we're taking a step outside the conventional office setting and diving into the world of business outside with our special guest, Bart Foster. Bart is not just an entrepreneur, he is a visionary who has embraced the power of nature and the great outdoors to transform the way we think about work, creativity, and personal growth. In his book, Business Outside, Bart shares his journey from leading companies in a traditional corporate setting to discovering the immense benefits of connecting with nature and authentic self-discovery. In this episode, we'll explore the pivotal moments that led Bart to his unique philosophy, the transformative power of nature on our work and well-being, and how stepping outside our comfort zones can lead to profound personal and professional growth. So let's get ready to step outside, both literally and metaphorically, with Bart Foster on the Conscious Entrepreneur Podcast. Hey, Bart Foster, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining the Conscious Entrepreneur.
Good to see you, Alex. Great to be here.
This is going to be a lively conversation because this allows us to get outside of our comfort zones. There's so much talk these days about well-being in the entrepreneurial circuit, and so many companies offering support, or they're doing telehealth and becoming employee benefits. And you approach this from a very different perspective. Your prescription, so to speak, seems remarkably simple and something very doable and something that we should all be very enthusiastic about. Tell us about the benefits of spending more time outdoors, of doing business outside, as you call it.
Yeah, it's it started, I'll give you the origin. And I moved to Boulder about 9 years ago, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And we'll go into some of the history and like how I got here and everything, but I had some trauma, and I kind of lost my personal identity, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And I reached out to a number of entrepreneurs and business owners and people in YPO, and I would say, hey, can you meet for coffee or lunch? And this one woman, you might know her name's Elizabeth Krause.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I don't do coffee or lunch. She said, meet me at the trailhead and we'll go for a walk.
Okay.
And I remember telling my wife, like, this is so weird. I don't know what to wear. Like, I'm going on a hiking meeting, right? But something special happened that day because I'm walking shoulder to shoulder and I'm more authentic and I'm more vulnerable. And I turned to Elizabeth in the middle of the hike and I said, I got forced out of the company I founded. And I thought for sure she'd go, oh my gosh, like what? And she just kept walking. She's like, oh yeah, it happens all the time. And I felt more alive. I felt heard. And I got home and I told my wife, and I was so excited. And that became my default. And entrepreneurs would say, hey, can I pick your brain? Can I meet you for coffee? And I'd say, meet me in my house and we'll go for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd walk up Sanitas, and we, as you know, we're here in Boulder, and that became something that I just did. And what I realized, this goes to your question, is I realized when I'm outside, I'm more creative, I'm more authentic, I'm more innovative. I feel happier. I feel more alive. I feel more energetic. And then when Zoom, when we started getting these Zoom calls and then COVID hit, all of a sudden things kind of took off and I put a business together. We'll talk about that. But that was the origin.
So Bart, tell me a little bit more about what you just said there to Elizabeth in your first walking meeting. What was it that was going on in your life that had motivated these big changes for you coming out here, and where were you in that transition?
So I was in Atlanta. I was an entrepreneur. I was inside a company called Novartis that I spun out of business that I ran for 7 years. We put those health kiosks. You may have seen like the blood pressure machines in Walmart and Safeway.
Yeah,
that was my company. And we raised $50 million in capital. We scaled it 4,000 locations, and I felt really on top of the world. A couple months before, I got a call from my chairman, and he asked, how big do you want this company to get? And we went to breakfast. We went to the Flying Biscuit. It's this place in Atlanta. And, I shared with him a number. And he said, Bart, every once in a while, you see a company that has all the makings of going public. And this is one of those times. And he said, but you're not the guy to run it.
Oof.
And long story short, and we can go into more detail, but I got forced out of the company that I founded. And I remember the emotions, and I got in my car and I was crying, and I felt alone and embarrassed. I felt pissed off and angry. I felt betrayed. And yeah, that put me on a whole new path. And there's a lot of details around it, and it took a few months, and I ended up staying on the board for a couple of years. But I got some really good advice. And I actually went to a YPO meeting, and there were two resources. The first was this guy, Tommy Newberry. He's a life coach, and he's based in Atlanta, but we were up in Cape Cod, and he put up a slide and it said, "How many spring breaks and summers do you have left before your oldest goes to college?" And my wife and I were like, "Holy shit, like 8 years, 8 spring breaks. Like life's really short. Like go do it, you know?" And now as I'm telling this story, like my daughter's in college, that's over. And I got one more with my son. So that was a long time ago. The very next resource though, Alex, and this is relevant, is this guy, Jim Sharpe, and he teaches at Harvard Business School with his wife, and they teach how to find a business to buy. Because I thought maybe I'll buy a business.
Okay.
And of all the things he said, he called it the zip code strategy. He said there's companies all over the world, different sizes, different geography, different culture. He said, pick where you want to live first, and then you'll figure it out. And that night, my wife and I sat in bed, and she's like, we don't have any ties to Atlanta. Like, why are we here? And we started Googling like best place to raise a family and healthiest cities and best cities for entrepreneurs and all these things. And Boulder, Colorado, we didn't know was on the top of all these lists. And we didn't know anyone that lived here. We'd never been here. And we came out in the summer of 2014. It was July 6th. And somebody said, go to the rooftop of the Rio.
Mm-hmm.
And we got a margarita, and we were with our kids, and we just looked and said, God, this is it. And the original plan was I was going to take a few months, or take a year and commute back and forth. And like, if we're going to do this, like, let's figure out what I want to do for work. And my wife, who's really not that spontaneous, and she said, look, if we're going to do this, I don't want to be in limbo for a year. Let's get the kids in school in August.
Wow.
And Alex, we went back to Atlanta. We sold half our shit, and we moved out 2.5 weeks later.
Well done.
And that was 9 years ago.
Okay.
And probably a month after that is when I went on this hike with Elizabeth. And I shared with her, and it was probably one of the first people in Boulder that I shared that, I was forced out of the company I founded. And I didn't know what I was going to do.
I want to highlight there just how much the relationship can bloom when you are vulnerable first. And you and I have talked about this before, but you set something up. You set you send a message, and you're modeling certain behavior when you do that. Probably felt very uncomfortable the first few times that you were phrasing it like that, because there's lots of ways that you could have sugarcoated what had happened at the company. But you're a big proponent of getting vulnerable and getting into those, what you call the 10% zones and the 5% zones when it comes to real authentic communication.
You got it, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking the language. Yeah. If you think about a bell curve, right? The people that are listening, think about a bell curve. 70% of the conversations that we have in life are right in the middle. How's your weather? How's your job? How's your kids? We should catch up sometime. That's a cool car. Who's going to win the Super Bowl? Like, for the most part, nobody cares. Right? They just don't. But it's that small, that's where everyone stays. But it's the 10% on each side of that bell curve, positive and negative. You get a little bit deeper. You get to the feeling, the emotion. I'm mad. I'm scared. I'm pissed off. I'm angry. I'm sad. I'm happy. And then the 5%, the tail at the very end, that's where we rarely go. Maybe a really close friend, a spouse. Sometimes it's trauma. But what I learned is if I can go deeper, quicker, it gives other people the permission, So I'll start, and I'll give an example. It's like, I'm Bart. I wrote a book last year. I live in Boulder, Colorado. I have 2 kids, 18 and 20. I love to open water swim. I love to hike. I have this company called BusinessOutside. Nobody cares, right? But if you really knew me, and if I went deep and we were on a hike, I'd say, I got a senior in high school, and I think I'd watched him play 750 basketball games. And he's a starting point guard. He's been on varsity for 4 years, and I have 13 more games left. And it makes me sad. Yeah, and I'm going to be an empty nester really soon. And that's the 10%. And then at the 5%, I would say I got forced out of the company I founded. But I went there first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in this podcast, I wanted to demonstrate. But you see the difference, right? The 70-10-5. So yeah.
So many of us are conditioned to kind of think in terms of small talk and transactional relationships. And one of the things that we do, and you know this because you were there at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, is really try to encourage that 10% and 5% conversation. And you'll even remember there were folks up on stage, right, in front of an audience of 200 people, really sharing some of that stuff that belongs in that's in the 5 and 10%.
It was a great event. And yes, you foster this. This is why I wanted to come on this podcast, why I'm a big proponent of the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit and what you're trying to build, because it's lonely, right? And we often feel that we have to put up this mask and this veneer, and I'm raising capital and all these things. And it's hard. It's really, really hard to be an entrepreneur, and it's lonely. And the external people that are in these big companies, I call them corporate fuddy-duddies.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one, right? But a lot of these strategics sitting in corporate venture, they've never sat in your shoes. And when they say, hey, we'll get back to you a few months from now, it's like, shit, I might be out of money in 3 months. Come on. But it's like, we don't get it. So when we can band together as a tribe, and that's what I think you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole mental health, it's a big deal. So I'm glad.
Yeah, I'm a big deal. I got a lot of inspiration in terms of what we do at Conscious Entrepreneur from my own journey. So like I've lived it, I've been there, and I'm always attracted to find people who can share real personal stories, real personal insights into what it's like as an entrepreneur. Tell us, I want to back up even more. Tell us more about the process of starting this company, raising capital, being a CEO. I know it was sort of intrapreneurship, as they call it, within the company. But tell us about how all that worked and what you learned in the 7 years up to the point where you were no longer involved.
Oh, the former business. Yeah. Okay. So I was inside Novartis. I was in the contact lens division. I was selling contact lenses. I happened to be living in the UK. I was doing an international assignment, and Walmart was my biggest customer. And Walmart said, you're the leader in contact lenses. Help us figure out a way to drive traffic from the store into the vision center. Because all the Walmarts have these vision centers, but only 13% of the people that shop the store even knew they had a vision center. So they had a big awareness problem. And I'm in Birmingham, England. I'm sitting in the back of the room. It's 2004. And we had Glenn Denning and did this big category management initiative. These consultants are on the whiteboard. And I remember it was like yesterday, I raised my hand. I said, guys, what if we had a kiosk and it would screen your vision? And instead of like, what's better, 1 or 2, like we'll just dial it in. You do it yourself and it'll print a report. And it was so clear to me. And that was a light bulb moment. They wrote it on the whiteboard. And they're like, oh yeah, that's cool. And I was like, no, like that's the idea. And I locked in. I wrote the base of the business plan, started communicating back and forth with the corporate venture folks and the general counsel. They filed a patent in my name, and I was super excited and got to move back to the U.S., started working on it. And I was an entrepreneur. It was never a full-time job. It was always a passion project.
Oh, okay.
But I was able to cobble together some internal funding, got some support from the board, and then eventually and there's a whole other story that's really fascinating if anyone's interested in corporate venture and how to spin something out of a company. But I was actually one of the only people that ever out-licensed from Novartis, and we spun out a business called Solo Health. I started October 1st of 2007, and I was employee number 1, and I learned really quickly it's hard. It's really hard, and but I was able to raise, I think, 1.8 million in the first, say, 6 or 9 months. And that got us kind of off to the races a little bit. And yeah, there's some cool stories about Walmart and how we actually pivoted into what became the Solo Health Station that I'd be happy to share.
Wow. And so you went. So what were the foundations of that pivot? That's a big topic for people. Is how do I know when I'm on target? How do I know when I need to shift or change or what's going
Sure.
on out there? Yeah.
So we had vision kiosks. We put them in 100 locations. We test versus control stores. We knew these things worked. Like people went in, they got an eye exam, they get their test, and then we drive them in to get an eye exam. It didn't scale. It didn't work. It didn't work because the American Optometric Association, who I found out is one of the most powerful lobbies outside the NRA, they didn't want this to work. And the eye doctors were scared shitless. We're going to replace them. So they did everything to not make it successful. And it was a referral model. Like we were trying to send them business but we had a pocket success, and that was in Walmart. And I went up in 2008, and I had all this data, test versus control. And we showed that in Walmart stores that had a kiosk, sales of optical products were 20% more than the stores that didn't. And I was so confident. I went up and I go to Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, and I meet with Dr. John Aguinobi. He's the head of health and wellness. He's the first MD ever hired at Walmart. And there's 14 other VPs in the room. And he said, "Hey, Bart, before we start," he's like, "how big is the whole vision industry? Like the whole thing?" And I said, "Well, between contact lenses and glasses and services, the whole, it's 28.5 billion. He's like, "Okay." He's like, "Because you know that the Walmart optical business is underneath health and wellness, which also includes pharmacy, right?" I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "Bart, do you know how big my Walmart pharmacy business is?" I said, "No." He said, 32 billion. He said, "So what floats your boat doesn't float mine." He said, "In fact, I don't give two shits about vision." That's what he said. And I was like, "Oh shit, this isn't going very well." And he said, "And you know that end cap you're taking up at the end of the aisle?" He said, "It's worth $1 billion a year. You should be paying me to be there." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Bart, I don't care if we put chapstick, Doritos, lip balm." He said, 140 million people a week shop my stores. And he said, and I got my tail between my legs. I'm like, holy shit, this is not good. And I had spent all my money, like we were out of money. And he said, "But listen, I like you. I like what you're doing." He said, "You know that old outdated blood pressure machine in the corner?" He's like, "I hate it. It's not networked. People are spilling milkshakes on it. Half of the time doesn't work." He said, "But my operations team won't let me get rid of it because," he said, "we've done a lot of surveys. It's the number one loyalty driver in pharmacy." He said, "Betty comes in every Wednesday and she gets her blood pressure taken. And if it's not there, she's going to go to Walgreens. We can't have that." He said, "So have you ever thought about like combining the two, like vision and blood pressure?" And I just lit up. I'm like, "John, that's why I named the company Solo Health. It's yes, like, yeah." And I said, "Would you," and I thought this was really smart. I said, "John, would you consider funding the R&D in exchange for exclusivity? Like, I won't go to Target. Like, we'll do it with you." And he just leaned back. He like puts his arms. He's like, "No." It's like, "Bart, we're Walmart." He said, "I'm just going to tell NCR and Diebold and IBM and all of them, that's what I want. And the first people that bring it to me." I was devastated, man. I got in the car. I almost wanted to cry, but I pull out my phone and I had 8 text messages from my investors and my board. "How'd the meeting go? Are we going to scale?"
Yeah.
My stomach was just in knots, man. I fly in. My COO picks me up at the airport and he says, "Hey, I know it was a tough meeting, whatever." He's like, "This might be a long shot, but I got to tell you, we found this grant through the federal government. It's this Obamacare stuff." And he's like, "It's for $1.2 million. And I think we're kind of doing what they want. It's using medical technology to educate, underperforming populations and things." And long story short, Alex, we applied for this grant. We got it, fast tracked it. We put our head down, didn't talk to anybody for a year and a half, and built the Solo Health Station. And we went back to Walmart. We piloted in the summer of 2012. I got a call that I waited for 4 years. And they said, "Your pilot exceeded our expectations. How soon can you be in 4,000 stores?"
Dang.
And then it took off from there, and it changed my life. But we brought in Redbox. You remember those guys? In fact, the CEO lives here now. Greg Kaplan lives here in Boulder, and we've reunited. And he was one of my first investors. Led our Series A, and Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield came in. Dell and Michael Dell got involved personally. We had $25 million in debt from Dell, and we scaled. And in the summer of 2012, we were deploying 50 units a day all over the country.
Wow.
And it was so exciting. And then fast forward 2 years later, and they wanted to go a little bit bigger, and I wasn't the guy to run it.
What an incredible story. It's so interesting to hear the background, the pivot, the ups and downs, which is something that every entrepreneur goes through, these massive swings and ups and downs. And so how did you then, besides liking Boulder for quality of life and the zip code strategy that you mentioned earlier, so how do you then transition into supporting other entrepreneurs, supporting other companies with Business Outside?
So it started, Alex, I still had a lot of connections in the optical industry, eye care. And I thought about, maybe I'll do some consulting. And I was working with some of the bigger companies because they wanted to be more innovative. They saw what I did and they wanted that. At the same time, entrepreneurs were calling me and said, hey, I'm doing this work and it's kind of similar to what you do, or how did you raise money? And they were all asking the same questions. And I decided that I was going to create an innovation summit. And I wanted to create an event that I always wanted to go to that just didn't exist. And what we did, and we started this 6 years ago, we invited 40 C-level executives from big companies. And then I handpicked 8 startups. And what was unique, though, is I had the startups come and they presented their biggest challenge. And I got them to be vulnerable. So it wasn't pitching for money. It was like, hey, I'm trying to get a connection here. And then I asked the big company folks, I said, hey, of the 8 companies you all present, who are the 3 that you think you can help the most? And then we went and had rooftop dinner the next morning. They come, and we had almost like a mini Shark Tank, but I got people to be vulnerable. We got them outside, we walked, and all of a sudden, you could just feel it. The energy was different. And that put me on this journey of, hey, I wonder if there's a different way to do business. And when COVID hit, I'm on my 5th Zoom call of the day. I'm looking outside and it was 70 degrees and sunny. And I'm like, have this brain fog. I'm like, what am I doing? And I texted the 2 last calls I had of the day and I said, hey, I'm going to go outside for a walk. And I hope it's not weird, but would you mind if we just, and they said, actually, I'll do the same thing. And we walked and we were talking, and all of a sudden I was more alive. And that was kind of when Business Outside was born. And originally, Alex, I was just going to write a column and maybe go to Outside Magazine and say, hey, I'll write a column. It's called Business Outside. And my buddy Anthony here in town, he's like, no, don't do that. He's like, they're just going to take the idea. He's like, go get the trademark. And I was like, you can't trademark Business Outside. And we did. And what he helped me realize is that it's not just outside of nature. It's out of your comfort zone, and it's outside of corporate norms. It's doing things a little bit differently. And a big part of this, and it'll circle back to what your question was, is it's about breaking down the walls and being vulnerable and being real and authentic. Because as humans, we all want the same things. We want to feel heard. We want to feel valued. And when you're outside and clothing doesn't matter and you're walking shoulder to shoulder, and I like to say motion creates emotion, right? And all of a sudden the hierarchy goes away and you realize we're not human resources. We're humans. And we're not colleagues and coworkers. We're mothers and fathers and caregivers. And when we get to know each other as humans, that's when the magic happens.
Nice. And so you start doing these and you think, hey, that worked, and you evolved into making that a core practice of what you do. I mean, I've been on your on these hikes. I know a lot of people in Boulder have. I know actually a lot of people all around the country have. But how did you get to say, hey, you know what? This needs to be a thing that I'm doing every time I'm interacting with people. This needs to be the forefront of what I'm all about.
I think I realized that people are craving connectivity. They want connection, genuine connection with each other. And as things moved, as the future of work changed from in office to remote into hybrid, all of a sudden people are lonely and they want this genuine connection. So I started looking at the trends, and because I was a big company guy, I went to all these meetings, right? And you fly to these amazing destinations, and I'd get home and my wife would be like, "How'd it go? How was the Bahamas, or how was what?" Fill in the city, it didn't matter. It's like, well, I don't know, because I was in this conference room looking at PowerPoint slides, and she's like, "What?" Right? We know what those are like. And I also realized that, alcohol, and look, I'll have a few drinks and it's fine. But what I realized is in corporate America, like, alcohol had been used as a crutch to help people form connections because they didn't know how to have more genuine connections. I think that's all going away. And I think what people want when they have these meetings, they get together and they do their quarterly offsite, whatever, it's not boozing it up at the bar. They want genuine connection. And that has become a movement that I want to start. I want to have people think differently, act differently, and ask better questions so that we can get to the feeling and the emotion. Because if we can do that, we can build trust. And if we can build trust, we're going to have healthy conflict. You know that Lencioni, 5 dysfunctions of a team, build trust, healthy conflict, commitment, actions, results, all of it. But it starts with trust. And that's how we build trust, through vulnerability, authenticity. And we just use nature almost like a silent partner.
I like that. Nature is a silent partner to build trust. Sure. And so you then wrote a book, which I've got right here, also called Business Outside. And tell us about the process of writing the book. This is where I saw there was that zip code strategy. There's the bell curve of our comfort zones. You also write in here about things like minimizing regret. So how to live life in a way that is regret minimizing. Tell us about the process of writing the book, how the ideas came to you, and what else is in here.
So the tagline is discover your path forward.
Yeah.
And it's really a modern trail guide to living a more intentional life. And I didn't have an intention of writing a book, and I would go on these hikes, and people would meet me in my house. We'd hike the trail, and I would share with them, and I would draw that bell curve in the dirt. And they would always say, "You got to write this down. This is a book. You got to write this down." And finally, there's a guy, Jim Warner, in town. You might know. He's a coach, and he and I are walking, and he said, "Bart, instead of thinking about and hoping and wishing and just contemplating," he's like, "just change the word to commit." And I think it was January 6th of, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, I committed to writing a book. So that's how that started in that process.
Cool.
I wrote basically, I was with a guy, his name's Rob Mossman, and he and I were coming back from Silverton. We had a 5 or 6 hour drive, and I shared with him the outline of the book. We went through chapter by chapter, and I just wrote down 15, 16 chapters, and then found a team that can help me put it together. And that's how it's about an 18-month process.
Wow. Very, very cool. It's always inspiring to see people who go through the work to put out their own book and distill their ideas down. Let's talk about some of the ideas that are in there. Tell us about regret minimization.
So that one I learned from Jeff Bezos. They asked him, how did you give up this awesome job in New York and move across the country to Seattle and start Amazon? And he said, he likes to look at his life as if he's 80 and he looks backwards and wants to minimize as many regrets as he has. And I read that maybe 15 years ago, maybe longer, 20, before I left Kellogg the first time. So that's a piece of the story I left out. I joined an internet grocery firm. You probably have heard of Instacart.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
We were Instacart 15 years too early. We weren't Instacart. But I had just won at Kellogg's. I had won the National Salesman of the Year. Like, it was a big deal. I was the youngest person to ever win this thing.
Yeah.
I was flying high. I was on this growth track, and I left. And my mom, my dad, all these people were like, "You're crazy." And I left because I read this article, and it was in Fast Company magazine, and Jeff Bezos talked about regret minimization. And ever since then, it's been a big cornerstone of my life to every time I'm faced with a big decision, I say, okay, which one am I going to regret more? Doing it or not doing it? And in that case, I would have regretted not joining that startup. I would have regretted not leaving Novartis and starting Solo Health. I would have regretted not moving to Boulder and giving up everything in Atlanta. I would have regretted not writing the book. So regret minimization is about it's a framework of how to make a tough decision.
When you're talking about that, it reminds me of another book that I heard of from you, which is Die with Zero. And, same idea of how do I make sure I'm making the best use of my life while I am living it? Basically meaning while I am healthy and able to do all these things that I care about or that I want to go out there and experience in the world. So many of us get stuck in this hamster wheel of, no, just keep going, do the corporate thing, or kind of, not willing to take the risks to create the life that we're looking for.
When this happens, then I'll do this. When I get this much money, right? When I have that. No, because what he talks about in Die with Zero is there's three things that are finite, right? Time, money, and health. So you might have the money and you might have the time, but if you don't have the health, I read an article actually today. It said, I think it was Michael Easter. He wrote the book, The Comfort Crisis. You might know. He posted something that said that the average person actually lives to 64 point something healthy. And then you live another 9 years not healthy. He said, so when people look at their lifespan, he said, you got to look at the healthy stuff because that last 9 years, that's shit, right? So, and in the book Die with Zero, he talks about that we actually die several times throughout our life. There's different deaths. And that might be a little bit morbid, but you get the point. And it's essentially like, hey, I'm going to be an empty nester. That period that is gone.
Right.
So I am maximum. I'm not going to miss a game. I'm trying to have dinner with my son and all these things because it's gone. And then I enter a new one, and the new one's going to be really cool. I mean, with my wife, we're going to travel and everything else. But so you go through these different periods, but health, money, and time. And if we think about how do we calibrate to maximize our life energy, that's what I'm trying to do.
Another one of the topics that comes front and center in the book is defining your personal values and how that can be such a helpful compass for people. How does one go about this? What are the questions that you can ask? What are the ways that you can start to think about this to come up with the real values, meaning, the ones that you actually care about, not the ones that you think society wants you to have?
So, I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years, and since writing the book, there's all different methodologies and things about values and what do values mean, and there's different ways to arrive at it. For me, what I did is I had these cards, and there were 78 cards. And you sort them into a pile, and which ones mean the most to you, and you narrow them down to 20, you narrow them down to 15. We put them into a pyramid with the number one value at the top, all the way down. And it helped me understand what I really value in life. And I've taken a variation of that. I put it in the book, and it's a checklist, and you kind of go through and you check them off. It's not an exact science, but it gets you pretty close. And then what I did is I looked at those and said, okay, I'm going to create a personal value statement. And in fact, I don't know if you can see mine's living back there in the back there, because I framed it. Because for me, it became like my North Star. And whenever I'm faced with a tough decision, I can look and say, the other thing that's cool is once you know what your values are, and I'll do this when I do keynotes in front of a big audience and things, I'll say, hey guys, write down those top 6 values, whatever. Okay, now I want you to rank them 1 through 5. 1 is never and 5 is always. In the last 6 months, how much have you leaned into that particular value? And I'll say, okay, does anybody have all 5? Nobody. Usually like one person, a group of 200, because it's somebody that's super enlightened and they're just living it. But for the most part, 2s, 3s, 4, And I'll say, guys, these are not my values. These are your values. And if you value it, we might have to recalibrate. So what I learned is if I could figure out how to create a life that's aligned with my values and is aligned with my zone of genius, which I know you have Gay Hendricks on, big fan. He came up with that zone of genius. If I could combine those two, value, zone of genius, that's when I'm going to be the happiest, the healthiest, most productive. So that, to me, is living an intentional life that's happening by me instead of to me.
Absolutely. Tell us what your personal value statement says.
I value personal freedom, which allows me to lead an active and healthy life full of adventure. I will build authentic and loving relationships with friends and family, and I will fulfill myself through curiosity, personal growth, and lifelong learning. That's me.
That's a great one. That's a great one. I love it. I know that you have gotten resources from lots of different places along your entrepreneurial journey, and I know that a group that you work quite a lot with is YPO. For people who don't know, share what YPO is and how it can benefit an entrepreneur to be a part of these peer support groups like that.
Sure. So YPO is an international organization. I think there's over 32,000 members across the world. There's a requirement to get in with revenue and employees and so forth. The Y is Young Presidents Organization. So I believe the cutoff is like 42, something like that, maybe 45. But it's essentially people in their 30s and 40s, young 40s, that in some 20s, that are running businesses. A third of YPO members are family-run businesses. A third are what you call hired gun, and a third are entrepreneurs. I fell into the entrepreneur category. Once I qualified for YPO, I joined, this is like 12, 14 years ago. But a cornerstone of YPO is something called Forum. And there's groups of 8 to 10. They meet on a monthly basis. And you share family, personal, business. And for me, it's become like a personal board of directors. Now, what I realized, and you know, it's all confidential. You can be very vulnerable. You just put it all out there, and you have these a diverse group of peers that can help and support you, because the higher up you get, the lonelier it gets, right? But what I realized is you don't have to be in YPO to have this. You just have to be intentional. And so there's all kinds of different organizations and groups popping up. And actually a big part of Business Outside now is I actually run forum groups of CEOs to have these intimate conversations. But you know, there's EO, there's Vistage, there's a lot of different models out there. But it's a powerful organization that has helped me personally. So a sub brand that we've created is called Forum Outside, and it's doing Forum a little bit differently. So Forum Outside is, and we put a lot of tips and tools and things of how to do that.
Very cool. You know, a lot of the benefit of these groups is just realizing that you're not alone. So you might be, you know, in a certain situation, and if you're like me, you get stuck in your head, right? I get stuck in my head about stuff, and then when I don't have the ability to go talk to someone or ask questions, then I just find myself kind of getting stuck in a loop. So to me, the benefit's always been go meet with peers and use this as a place to realize, oh, others have gone through these same issues and challenges as me.
Shared experiences, not advice.
Right.
So we say to have empathy, not judge. So you want to have no judgment and just say, hey, this is what happened to me, and here's how I handled it. And then you get to make the own decision. That's not normally how we're wired, right? We're usually, hey, Alex, that's tough. You should do that. No, there's no I should. It's shared experiences.
Now, let's say that someone listening to this podcast gets really inspired by the idea of getting out and walking with friends or people that they know or connections, and they want to build authentic relationships, and they want to ask those deep and meaningful questions, and they go grab a buddy and go out for a hike. What do you see to be the best ways to get deep fast? Like, what are the best questions to ask? You already shared how you will approach with things that went on in your business life and be vulnerable first. And if I'm in question asking mode, what are the places to start?
I will give you a link that you can put in the show notes, and people can download a whole list. And we put them into 3 different buckets: level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1, I wouldn't say they're superficial, but you could pretty much ask anybody. And a level 1 question is something like, what's something you celebrated or you're proud of over the last 6 months, right? A level 2 could be something like, what's giving you energy? What's zapping your energy right now? Or a level 3 could be, what do you want your legacy to be? Right? And there's different levels of questions all throughout that.
Okay, cool, good. Well, we'll link that up, and I think that's going to be a very valuable resource for people who want to take this on themselves. Bart, as we get ready to wrap up this episode, I've got a few questions that I like to ask of the guests who appear on the Conscious Entrepreneur podcast. You obviously were a part of the event that we had last year in June, so you know the community. You very graciously hosted a connection hike on the day before the event, which was really well attended and got amazing feedback on as well. So you've had exposure to the community. What's your definition of a conscious entrepreneur?
I think authenticity is a word that comes to mind for me. Being real, being yourself, being genuine. Vulnerability is similar to authenticity, but a little bit different. It's vulnerability. It's taking care of yourself, being self-reflective, realizing that you don't have to have all the answers, and being humble, yet focusing on yourself first, because it's hard. And the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit is, to me, or the conscious entrepreneur to me is somebody it's not just focused on the bottom line. They're not just focused on return for their investors. They actually want to do something good, not just for themselves, but for humanity.
Great, thank you. And what are your daily sort of routines? What are the things that you do to maintain positive mindset, health, and to get through all the many hats that you wear and all the many roles that you have? What does a day, week, month look like for you?
I never set an alarm, but I always have an intention, and I have my clothes ready to go for whatever I'm going to do that day. And I get up, I have 2 glasses of water, and then I do some breath work. And I have an app that I download, and I can do some breath work. And sometimes it's 6 minutes, sometimes it's 15. And then I'll do some yoga and some stretching, and then I'll do some exercise. And I try to do I'm not always successful. I try to do all of that before I look at my phone. And then I try to get some sunlight in my eyes, get outside, get a little fresh air, and then I'm ready to go. By the time 2 or 3 o'clock rolls around, like right now almost, I start to fade. So I get up pretty early, get all my stuff done, and yeah, it helps.
How many days a week do you typically go for a hike?
Oh, it's probably three or four. And if it's not hiking, I'm skinning up the mountain on skis, or doing I like to swim as well. I like to swim outside. I love to be outside as much as I can. I feel like humans, we've been on Earth 2 million years, but it's for 1,997,000 years we were outside. It's only in the last 300 we had this migration indoors, and our bodies weren't meant for that. So I just feel it's more alive when I'm outside.
Absolutely. And then finally, what are the top tips or resources that you recommend to entrepreneurs? What's the book that you most give away, or the videos that you most watch?
Now I've been giving my book out because so many of the things that I've cultivated over the years is in there. Yeah. So this is outside. I would say, the Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty was a pivotal. That's one that I gave out a lot. I got it when I was 21. It was written by a guy named Harvey McKay. It's a little outdated now, but one of the premises is build relationships way before you ever need them. I think the piece that probably needs to be updated there is there's not a lot on the emotion and the vulnerability and the authenticity. It's more transactional, like collecting things. So I don't necessarily like that part, but the premise is good of building these relationships, because now, half the ideas that come to me and half the business, it's all just coming. It's all word of mouth, but it was 25 years of cultivating these relationships and keeping in touch with people that I genuinely care about.
Any other messages for our guests?
So on the hike that we did at your Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, one of the activities that we did, and I don't know if you heard about this, but we did these gratitude videos. And I asked people to think about who's a person in your life that you're really grateful for that maybe made a big impact on you at a fork in the road, right? We all had forks in the road, and people made a big impact. And I asked them to think about what did they say and how they make you feel. And then I said, hey, let's take out our phone, and I'm going to give you, a few minutes, and I want you to go record a selfie video, and I want you to send it. And what happened is, and I do this a lot, is it creates a gratitude loop, because most people, they don't realize the impact that they make on us. So if your guests and the people listening are open to it, here's the challenge. I want you to think about someone in your life you're grateful for. I want you to go outside, get into a nice, comfortable spot, and record a short selfie video. And if you want, blame it on me and say, hey, I heard this podcast and this weird guy from Boulder and Alex said this is fun. Fine. Blame it on me. But I promise you, just send it. And then if you get a response back, I'd love, or Alex, both of us, put it in the show notes and let's create a little movement, because I think we have an opportunity, and gratitude is so strong and powerful, but it's the selfie video that nobody does. And it cuts through the clutter. You get to the feeling, the emotion. And I'd love us all to do that.
Gratitude videos. Let's do it. Thanks so much for that suggestion. Fantastic. Well, hey, Bart, it's such an inspiration to hear you talk about the various transitions in your life, starting business, the challenges that came with that, coming back and doing a really, really great service for entrepreneurs and leaders via Business Outside. So it's great to hear that. Super appreciate you coming and joining us on the podcast. And I think everyone's going to look forward to learning more about how to do business outside. Thanks so much, Bart.
It's been great, man.